The strongest human being on the planet versus the strongest inhuman being on the planet. It's a contest that was destined to happen at some point in Berserk. Now, some of you guys might be thinking we're talking about Zod here, and well, it is true that his rivalry with Guts is one of the things that makes this series so iconic. Zod isn't the strongest apostle, strictly speaking. He's got insane resiliency, yes, but Guts is still alive after fighting him thrice, and that kind of thing doesn't usually happen. When an enemy comes up against Ganishka, however, they only have two choices: instant death or an extremely slow, painful death. This is why when Guts went up against Ganishka, we were scared for his life. What followed was a battle between two behemoths that proved Ganishka's status as the strongest apostle of his time, while simultaneously displaying Guts' ability to withstand pretty much anything at this point. Their clash was further evidence that the Black Swordsman has truly ascended humanity as a warrior, and in this video, we're going to take a detailed look at how he did just that. Guts versus Ganishka, round 1. An Imperial advantage and the Black Swordsman's peril. To be perfectly honest with you guys, the fact that Guts even engaged Ganishka is absolute insanity, because Guts was already pretty heavily injured at this point. He had just been in two back-to-back battles, starting off in chapter 265, both of which had taken a lot out of him. The first fight was against the Makara of Daiba's Pishachagana. As the Black Swordsman crew made their way to Vertanis Harbor so they could take a ship to Elfhelm, their path was blocked by countless Daka and Pishacha. Our resident Demon Slayer goes to work without using his armor, though it takes tremendous self-restraint on his end. Meanwhile, Shirke comes up with a more effective solution. She uses the Wheel of Fire, a potent astral spirit that personifies hellfire, to cleanse Vertanis Harbor of their enemies. But as soon as she does so, dozens of Makara spring out of the water. This is where things started to go awry. Guts went berserk mode and slaughtered every last one of them, and each Makara is the size of a whale, mind you. One of them can sink 10 warships before taking critical damage, and enough were gathered here to sink an entire nation's army. All of that was child's play to Guts though, especially when he was fully synced up with the Berserker armor. He tore his way through all of them, and even managed to survive getting a hole in his chest from a Makara that chomped down on him. The Berserker armor took care of all that, and allowed him to keep fighting without worrying about the pain. But once he had dealt with the Makara, he now had to focus on their leader. And no, we're not talking about the Kundalini alone, we're also adding Daiba to the list. The Black Swordsman's battle with the Kushan Wizard General started off explosive. In his berserker state, Guts knew nothing better than just leaping for the enemy's head. But Daiba was a wizard, and such tactics against a tricky opponent like him would only put Guts in danger. Shirke recognizes this, and so she uses the moment the Eastern Wizard propels the Black Swordsman into the heavens with a water spout to invade the latter's psyche, pull him out of his raid. If they wanted to make it through this battle alive, they needed Guts to keep his wits about him. Otherwise, they'd get caught up in Daiba's trickery, which becomes evident when he reveals the source of that water spout, the river-sized sea serpent Kundalini. This familiar was so strong that it controlled all the Undines in Vertanis Bay with its presence, and summoning something stronger than it was practically impossible for Shirke. The Black Swordsman had to dodge dozens of water spouts, avoid the Kundalini's diamond-cutting water beam, protect his friends, and figure out a way to win, all at the same time. Once Shirke revealed the enemy's weakness, the plan became simple, but because Guts' body was going to be used as a medium to achieve it, it was also exceptionally risky. The group decided to channel the Wheel of Fire spirit through Dragonslayer so they could bypass the Kundalini's water attacks and get to its main body, which works, but at a great cost. Guts basically used his body as a flame conductor on that occasion. Sure, the Berserker armor negated his pain, but the consequences of such a move were going to make themselves felt as soon as he took it off. And what's more, he didn't even have time to process his two victories because a third opponent showed up right after he defeated Daiba. You guessed it, Emperor Ganishka had entered the field. As soon as Daiba was defeated, the Dread Emperor manifested himself in the form of a hulking behemoth of a thundercloud. Now, if you've seen any of our content on him, his anatomy, or our breakdown of his Shiva form, then you will know Ganishka implants his fog within all of his sorcerers, can keep track of what's happening with them at all times. As soon as he sensed that a war galley full of them had been killed, he knew he'd just lost his biggest advantage on both land and sea, that being his Makara core. More than that, Daiba had also gotten the Kundalini killed, which means that they no longer possess the ability to control the seas of whichever territory they decided to invade. The Wizard General knew he had because he panicked the moment Kundalini went down, but he still tried to convince Ganishka that they could coast through with the rest of the Pishacha, because they had enough. The Dread Emperor zapped him with lightning for that joke and told him to clear off, because it was time to take matters into his own hands. He starts off by commending Guts and Serpico for being able to decimate his Pishacha and defeat his strongest soldier, all in the same battle. But then, he realizes that Guts has some sort of connection to his kind, because the stench of the other world clung to him. This stench, of course, was coming off of his brand of sacrifice, but Ganishka took it to mean that Guts was one of Griffith's henchmen. Without clarifying things further, he gears up to strike him and Serpico with lightning, and the only reason they survive was because of Shirke. As soon as she realized the Dread Emperor's intention, she told Serpico to use the Sylph Cloak and sword to erect a wind barrier around them. He manages to do it at the last possible moment, and his body goes numb because of the impact. But at least they all survive. All three realize that the next strike would kill them, and so they scatter. But because Guts is still wearing a suit of armor, the lightning finds its way to him anyways. Ganishka follows it up with a direct assault on him, and this time, Guts has nowhere to hide because his body is already partially incapacitated, and the lightning slows him down even further. Daiba is correct in stating that nothing can move faster than lightning, certainly no human. Even before Guts lands on a broken ship to break his leap, Ganishka's lightning bolt catches him. The power of the bolt is such that it fries the berserker armor off of Guts. Just think about that statement for a moment. Usually, it takes an immense astral effort to achieve this feat, but Ganishka's lightning bolt was so powerful that it shocked Guts' consciousness right out of the armor. The Dread Emperor sends a third bolt of lightning in his direction, and had Guts not been as battle-savvy as he was, Berserk could have ended then and there. He used Dragonslayer to redirect Ganishka's lightning off of himself, and this brought things to a stalemate. As long as Guts was using Dragonslayer as a lightning rod, Ganishka's lightning wouldn't be as fatal to him as it usually would. Still, the fact that Guts tanked 3 of his lightning strikes, where most people wouldn't be able to survive 1, impressed Ganishka enough for him to make an outlandish proposal. But for those keeping score, round 1 was basically a draw, though Guts came out of it in worse shape than he went into it, and he was already pretty banged up to begin with. Guts versus Ganishka, round 2. An impossible victory and an unlikely ally. Round 2 of Guts vs. Ganishka begins immediately after round 1, though the Black Swordsman gets some unexpected backup during this time. Guts had survived things that the human body simply wasn't meant to withstand. This fact led Ganishka to believe he might be one of Griffith's apostles, and when he withstood the third lightning bolt, the Dread Emperor was sure this guy was one of the Falcon's captains. While Guts spit back that abhorrent notion in his face, the truth was evident in his comrade's reaction to his provocation. One more hit like the ones he was tanking, and he'd be dead, because the Berserker armor was no longer active. Guts was all on his lonesome, so really, it was a relief when the Dread Emperor stopped raining down lightning and started talking again. What he said was interesting, because Ganishka was impressed with Guts' resiliency, but couldn't tell where it came from. Then, he noticed his brand of sacrifice, and understood the general gist of things. Guts had been branded by an apostle in Griffith's service, and so he sought revenge on that apostle. Consequences be damned. He was off the mark in that it was Griffith himself who did this to Guts, but his assessment of the man's true nature wasn't too far off the mark. Ganishka tried to recruit Guts because, to him, the Black Swordsman's malice and ruthlessness were agreeable traits for the world of filth he aimed to rule over. He wanted someone like Guts to compensate for the loss of his troops, because he recognized that this one soldier was worth 100,000 and then some. But, Guts being Guts, he rejected Ganishka's proposal and taunted him into attacking again. This is in line with his character, because Guts would rather die than become a monster to achieve victory, but it also sort of seals his fate. Ganishka prepares to strike him down with all his might as compensation for the Makara and Kundalini he lost, but before he can do that, Guts' saving grace arrives in the form of Griffith's war demons. The aerial unit of his apostle army had invaded Vritannis alongside Ganishka's demonic forces in an effort to repel them and the Dread Emperor. The flying apostles were able to make a difference when it came to the former, the latter couldn't find a breakthrough. Ganishka's form was too intangible, and his lightning was too strong for any of them to leave a proverbial mark on him. They tried to rush him at the same time to see if that would work, but it didn't. The Dread Emperor zapped most of them to the ground, and this brought out their leader and Guts' old nemesis, Zod. The Immortal One fared much better against the Thundercloud Apostle. Zod managed to make 3 passes at Ganishka without immediately crashing out of the air. He even went through the guy's released form once, and he had to put out the fire that was lit on his body by taking a dip in the ocean. By the time the Immortal One makes his 3rd pass at Ganishka, Guts had figured out the War Demon's strategy, considering they all swarmed him at once, and Zod was more concerned with going through him at a great speed as opposed to trying to kill him. It became clear that their goal was to scatter Ganishka's form. Zod's 3rd attempt is fast enough to catch the Dread Emperor off guard for a moment, which allows the rest of the Flying Apostles to try and accomplish their mission, but they fail to generate enough enough momentum. If you've seen our Shiva Explained video, you'll know that the reason these war demons were trying to scatter his form was because that was the key to defeating him. Griffith does it by summoning the sea breeze to blow away Ganishka's fog, but his war demons can't replicate that feat with just their wings. The Dread Emperor zaps them all out of the sky, including Zod, who is now incapacitated after taking in half a dozen lightning bolts. But this victory of his was also a part of Causality's plan. Before he left for this battle, Griffith's oracle Sonya told Zod that he would soon have to make a choice between fighting the blade that once cut his flesh or using it as a weapon. That moment was clearly a reference to the unlikely team-up that we get in chapter 277. When Zod falls out of the sky, he loses consciousness momentarily and crashes directly guts. Once in the water, he is startled to see the Black Swordsman here, but recalls his mission and makes for Ganishka once more. In a move unexpected for all bystanders, Guts climbs Zod's back and rides him like Vishnu rides a Garuda. The mythological one, not the Berserk equivalent. His first thought is to lop off Zod's head, because that would apparently kill the guy, and the Immortal One is delighted by Guts' bloodlust, but they both get zapped by Ganishka at that moment, bringing them back to the matter at hand. Guts taunts Zod, asking him why the Immortal One was getting smacked around like that, but Zod says it's easy for him to say these things because, as he could see, there was no weapon with which to cut the mist. He tries to decapitate Guts by flying past a shipmast at full speed, but the Black Swordsman ducks it, calls him out for it as well. Zod tries to shrug him off his back, but Guts puts Dragonslayer to his throat and instructs him to fly how he tells him to. Zod is in half a mind to drown him regardless, but just then, some extremely useful info comes in, courtesy of Shirke. As soon as he got on Zod's back, Guts asked his resident witch to find a way to defeat Ganishka, and she came through, albeit hesitantly. Shirke explained that while Ganishka's form was controlled through an ethereal body that collected sylphs and undines to make his thundercloud, his ethereal body itself existed within a much deeper layer than the interstice. This is why, even though Zod pretty much flew through his ethereal body, he was unable to affect it. Being a physical entity, his actions were restricted to having physical consequences. Guts' sword wasn't. When he was in Kliphoff, Guts learned that his sword could cut the flesh of a god hand at this point, considering how much evil energy it had been tempered in since Guts picked it up. The Black Swordsman realized that if it was good enough to work on Slan, it should be good enough to work on Ganishka, so he asked Shirke to locate his ethereal body and tells Zod they've got a mist cutter on hand. It was just pointing at his neck. The Immortal One recalls Sonya's prophetic words to him and decides to put differences aside for a common cause. He tells Guts to show him he could cut mist to shreds, and the Black Swordsman obliges by doing just that. As Zod makes a pass at Ganishka's physical body, Guts finds the location of his ethereal body thanks to Shirke and then flies through it upon Zod's back. The Dread Emperor electrocutes them both, of course, leaving the pair so fried that they crash into Vertanis' harbor, but by then the damage was done. Even Daiba couldn't believe that someone managed to locate Ganishka's real body, let alone deal with it effectively. No sooner had Guts and Zod flown through his brow than Ganishka's fog body dissipated. The Dread Emperor's actual physical body developed a white scar where Dragonslayer had run his soul through, and Ganishka was thoroughly pissed because he'd just been defeated by an apostle for the first time in his life. Zod was the first to recover from electrocution following their successful sortie, so he taunted Guts into keeping his word and fighting him to the death. He tries to force the Black Swordsman's hand by saying he would eat him if he didn't stand up, so Guts obliges, and this makes Zod back off. He does say that if Guts tries to go after Griffith, he would have his entire unit shred him to pieces, but luckily, Serpico steps in and reminds the former that a feud between monsters wasn't his concern. The Black Swordsman passes out from the exhaustion and injuries sustained during all the battles he fought trying to leave Vertanis, and the manga's focus shifts to the final showdown between Ganishka and his actual enemy, Griffith. You can learn more about how that went down from our Shiva Explained video, but for this one, we're gonna have to say that round 2 was a resounding victory for Guts, even though he had a little help. He not only cooperated with his arch nemesis, he also discovered both of Ganishka's weaknesses accurately, and proceeded to exploit the one that he could exploit to guarantee he came out on top. It kinda makes him seem thankless as well, because Ganishka offered Guts a place in his army before this round occurred, and if they joined forces, it would have been unstoppable. That's a discussion for another video. For now, let's just celebrate the fact that the Black Swordsman defeated Berserk's strongest apostle with the help of another. together. Now that we have the entire battle between the two parties out of the way and have discussed all the highs and lows of the same, let's get into speculative territory. Could Guts have beaten Ganishka if they met again under far different circumstances? Guts versus Ganishka, round 3. Could the Black Swordsman beat Shiva? It wouldn't be a versus video if we didn't give y'all something new to chew on, so let's counter this question. Could Guts defeat Ganishka's Shiva form? He already knows the Dread Emperor's two biggest weaknesses. He can exploit them however he wishes. Sure, he won't have Zod by his side all the time to help him out, but he has Serpico, and that man could fly if he wanted to. If he didn't, Guts could find a decent enough jumping spot and use the Berserker armor's powers to finish the job himself. But what if he had to go up against Ganishka in his Shiva form? Now that changes the conversation entirely. The sheer size of Shiva makes him one of the strongest creatures in all of Berserk. The dude spits fire on instinct, and because of his size, it looks like the heavens themselves have been set ablaze. And that isn't even addressing all the pseudo-apostles he spawns just unconsciously. Is it possible for Guts to defeat an enemy of that size and scale? Well, the truth is, he already has in the form of the Sea God. The Sea God was an adversary that was at the scale of Shiva Ganishka, if not beyond it. Unlike Shiva, the Sea God was in complete control of its faculties, so that helped it retaliate against Guts' efforts to invade its body. The Black Swordsman managed to do so regardless, and with a lot of effort and help from Shirke, he was able to finally take the life of a deity. He could have technically replicated all of that with Shiva Ganishka too, because, while he is an apostle, he possesses a body of flesh. This would have made Guts' job a lot easier than trying to cut something intangible, and that's the first reason why we think the Black Swordsman realistically beat Ganishka. Another is the fact that if he managed to make it inside of Shiva Ganishka's body, he'd be able to dismantle him from the inside out, because that's what he did to the Sea. You guys will get a better idea of why we're stressing on this point when you check out our Guts versus Sea God video. For now, let's just say that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And Shirke was able to detect an ethereal body contained within multiple layers of the astral world. Locating the heart of a physical manifestation and injuring it would be child's play in comparison. But let's not count out the Dread Emperor so easily. If he manages to stomp out Guts, it's game over, because the Black Swordsman would rise as one of his pseudos from that kind of the man he once was. We haven't even addressed the fact that, unlike the Sea God, Shiva Ganishka was mobile at all times. He might have lost his mind, but he could walk, talk, swing his arms, and spit flames when necessary. The Sea God was restricted by his cave for the majority of his fight with Guts, and even though he eventually broke out of it, it was too late. Ganishka is mobile enough to make entering his body a living hell for Guts if he doesn't crisp him up first. Yet, if Guts does manage to enter his body, it would likely be game over for Shiva. So, round 3 is at least speculative, in that either party's victory would depend on how they approach the battle. Unfortunately, because Ganishka loses his mind shortly after ascending, we're inclined to give this one to Guts, especially given his experience with the Sea God and the fact that he doesn't exactly put his stock in things like marvelous verdict. We hope you enjoyed our breakdown of the battle between Guts and Ganishka, because even though it only lasted a couple of chapters in the manga, it was one of the biggest fights of the former's life. It proved that not only was Guts prepared to kill godlike entities, he now had the wherewithal to do so. And if Ganishka fought him a third time, he'd have learned the truth firsthand, to his utter dismay. But that's just our opinion. What's yours? Who wins in the final fight between Ganishka and Guts? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, keep on struggling, strugglers.